This is Shitin welcoming you to Backstage, the life behind music. This is an online series of conversations with pianists, an exploration of their remarkable artistic lives as performers, teachers, and advocates for music. Through talking with them, I hope to shed some light on their process, as well as their backgrounds, what has led them to this point in their careers. I hope to get a glimpse into the special worlds they inhabit and illuminate some of their music making, the work that takes place before they or their students step out onto the stage. Please join me. I know you have studied Beethoven's music for many years. I was wondering, how did your fascination start with Beethoven?
The honest answer is I really can't say exactly. It's been with me ever since I started music at the age of 6. Uh, Around that same age, I started going, maybe a year or two later, I started going with my parents to their regular LA Phil subscription concerts. So I heard a lot of music, including a lot of Beethoven symphonies, and then I had teachers who were either students of Schnabel or students of Schnabel. So I was sort of brought up in the Arthur Schnabel tradition, the Schnabel school, if you can call it that. And so obviously Beethoven was a big centerpiece for that. One of my first teachers, Joanna Hodges, introduced me to Arthur Schnabel. Hadn't even heard of him before that, I guess, and started hearing his recordings of Beethoven. And then the next teacher after that was a student of Schnabel, Joanna Graudon, and so on. So I had Beethoven-centric teachers, and so I had Central European centric repertoire all the way along.
Has learning Beethoven and performing all of the Beethoven sonatas how has it influenced you as a musician?
Well, first of all, Beethoven's music is as profound as any music there is, and so right from the start, one had to learn what it meant to go for the depths and to not be interested in technical razzle dazzle or anything like that. And so that whole construct sort of made me, to a certain extent, the musician that I hope that I have become. Also, I could say in preparing the cycle, it certainly taught me how to organize my practicing. When I first performed the cycle at University of Iowa, this was a little bit crazy, but I did it all within a month. I did 2 concerts a week for 4 weeks. So I really had to learn how to prioritize and how to organize practice time, and keep one's eye on what's most important. But yeah, learning music, not just, especially Beethoven, that music, it's really learning music even before learning, piano playing, and it's all about music making. So that really, I guess, kept me in that frame of mind. And also, I've learned that this music keeps changing and deepening and ripening. So that each time I come back to it, obviously, one discovers new things, and one sometimes thinks, oh, how could I have not seen that or realized that aspect of it, when I played it through last time? That's just, for somebody like Beethoven, that's just par for the course. So I guess it teaches one to be humble, because just when you think you know it all about a piece, then you realize very shortly that you don't.
How did you decide to embark on such a big project to perform all the sonatas?
I guess I just sort of realized at a certain point that I had studied, 20 some odd of them. And so I figured, might as well learn the rest. And so now the rest at that time included the Hammerklavier, which I had never really officially learned. Never had any lessons with anybody on it. I still have not actually had any lessons on that piece with anybody. So it took me, a year or two to learn that thing at least. So it just seemed like a nice, the goal was within sight, and it seemed like a good project to do. And then I was now a professor at University of Iowa, so it seemed like a good thing that would advance my overall knowledge of the composer, and therefore hopefully become a more effective teacher.
What are some most interesting things you found or learned during this process?
I guess what I alluded to a couple of minutes ago is just the fact that one can never get to the bottom of this music, or to quote Arthur Schnabel, it's music that is better than can be played. And so one learns that in revisiting these pieces, that there are always somehow new dimensions to uncover, or new relationships within a piece to uncover, and new ways of thinking about life, learning about what this all means, and what, how it's a reflection of Beethoven's view, and all of that. So it's self-teaching. In studying the music, one learns a lot about music. So that's quite fascinating to realize.
Have you ever encountered students that just are not so familiar with the language of Beethoven and have a hard time understanding how to interpret or even appreciate Beethoven? And how do you go about helping them in that way to appreciate Beethoven?
Well, the fact of the matter is, although I myself have played Beethoven all my life and have played many concerts, and many various people have said nice things to me, it doesn't mean that I magically, am the Pope, so to speak, and can claim that I have the proper affinity with Beethoven. All any of us can do is study this music and try to understand it. And so I think because the music is great, and hopefully I can show in working with the student what is great about the music and why it's valuable to me, why it is, profound and great and so forth. And hopefully they will realize that and love the music and study it. And who's to say that what they do is, any less idiomatically correct than what I do. Because also, Beethoven is so universal, and that, it's not like it's reserved for certain people and inaccessible to others. But I suppose it requires a certain mindset and a certain set of priorities and values, to use perhaps a too dicey word. And it requires, a certain performance ethos, you could say, to play this music. And obviously, we know from accounts of his contemporaries that Beethoven was not interested in flashy display, and his biographer Schindler was very disappointed to see that what he called a newer school of pianistic perfection and glossiness and showiness of the generation after Beethoven is getting away from what Beethoven wanted. So it's good for students to, be exposed to this kind of musical ethics, I think, that Beethoven provides. But yeah, I think students, it's just part of one's education when this music is too universal and too great to not try to play it. And one should study as best one can, and any one person can find some wrinkle or tint or awareness or realization about a piece that perhaps all the great pianists have not.
Yeah, I think another thing that you mentioned a little earlier that was very important is to listen to all of the music, not just piano music. Because when I was little, I had trouble understanding
Beethoven sonata, and my teacher would assign a Beethoven sonata to me, and I have to be honest, I didn't enjoy it as much as pieces like Chopin or Liszt, those kind of flashy music. But I went to concerts, live concerts with my parents, and I listened to Beethoven Third Symphony for the first time, and I was very impressed, and I was very moved by that music. From beginning to end, I thought I had experienced the journey, and it was very moving to me. Moving experience.
Yeah, I think it cannot be stressed enough how important it is to get outside of the piano repertoire, and so many very, very talented students have, if one plays, and you ask them, what is this? And they, like, it's no idea. Of course, that's the Pastoral Symphony. And so it's just part of one's understanding of composer. Just as with Mozart, one has to know his operas, and with Tchaikovsky, you have to know his symphonies, and with Brahms, you have to know his symphonies and his chamber music and German Requiem and so on and so forth. That's just part of learning it. And continue studying, continue learning about music, about life, and everything else.
What other art form that you find inspirations from?
Painting. I absolutely love going to museums and looking at great painting culture. I love film, and I'm learning a little bit more about that and getting more greater appreciation of the art form that can be. And of course, I've always enjoyed the art of the culinary arts. So I've always been kind of a foodie. Within music, I'm a huge opera lover. I love listening to opera and opera singers all the time. I'm fortunate that I'm able to have Sirius XM subscription in my car, and there's one of the channels on that is the Metropolitan Opera Channel, which plays historic broadcasts, going back 70 to 80 years. So I get to hear all of these great singers, from the past, Leontine Price, Leonard Warren, Björling, all these great people, and they're just enormously inspiring. And one can learn a great deal, not directly. I mean, if you hear a great singer sing a Verdi aria, it doesn't mean that you play Beethoven like Verdi, but one learns about human communication and human expression through that, and one can translate it, into the proper composer's style. So yeah, huge fan of opera, and Lieder has also been a great love of mine. I don't do nearly as much of it as I wish I could. But my teacher, Joanna Grouden, when she studied with Schnabel, she sort of financed her lessons by accompanying his wife's lessons. His wife was a great Lieder singer, Teresa Behr Schnabel. And so, to make a long story short, Joanna Grouden introduced me into the world of Lieder. And especially, she always told me that if you want to play Schubert well, you have to know his songs. So I started getting to know his songs, the cycles and everything else. And she introduced me to some great singers that she personally knew, such as Hans Hotter. And that's been a huge inspiration for me as well.
I was wondering, as a young student growing up, do you remember any experience that were formative and helped you find your way as a musician and artist?
Yes, there have been some experience. One that interesting. I was probably about 13 or 14, and I heard Rudolf Serkin play the last three Beethoven sonatas in person in LA. And I didn't know those sonatas yet, but to this day, there's something about that concert that has stayed with me, especially the 111. There's something about the kind of the wisdom and humanity that he brought to Opus 111, especially, that I think influences how I play that piece and influences my music making to this day. Well, certainly that was one of them. Hearing an all Brahms Lieder recital of Hermann Prey, great baritone, was also a great experience. What else? Some of the, let's see, another, I was fortunate enough to be living in LA during the years where the great conductor Kurt Zonderling guest conducted LA a lot. And I went to his rehearsals. I have a good friend in the LA Phil who let me in. and his performances, and I learned a tremendous amount from his rehearsals about how to think about music and what music can mean, and his approach to music making is a big influence on me. So that was one thing. Also, some of Carla Maria Giulini's concerts were great inspiration, also when he was conductor of the LA Phil. Let's see. One or two of my former teacher, Leon Fleischer's performances, especially of the Ravel left-hand concerto and of the Brahms Bach Chaconne. Excuse me. Yeah, there was one Brahms Bach he did when I was at Peabody as a student, which was tremendous. And about 10 or 15 years ago, he did a Ravel left hand with the Cleveland Orchestra at Blossom, which was one of the most beautiful times I've heard him play it, and I've heard him play it a few times. It was really especially poetic. And he followed it with an encore. This was, he sort of dedicated this performance to a Lynette Dears Cohen, who was the wife of Franklin Cohen. She had died of cancer, and he sort of dedicated that performance to her and played his familiar encore, the Bach Sheep May Safely Graze. And the combination of that Ravel and Bach was a very moving performance and showed me what the power of music can do beyond just, piano playing. Anyway, so those are some of the great musical experiences I've had.
So are there any other great artists that have had major influence on your music making?
Yes, as I said, getting back to some of the great singers, I often find that two idols I have in music making are sopranos. Actually, I guess I would say three. Elisabeth Schumann, Lotte Lehmann, and Maria Callas. I have learned so much just about the art of human communication and meaning in music and meaningfulness in music from these three sopranos. And let's see, so those three. Now among conductors, I've dabbled in conducting my whole life and done some conducting here and there, and I watched some great conductors, and I've learned a tremendous amount. But certainly the conductor, Furtwängler, the great conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, has been a huge, maybe even too huge sometimes, influence on how I think about music, on his sense of form, of architecture, has been hugely beneficial for me, I think. In a Furtwängler performance, there's a piece of music is a totality, and everything fits together, and every part of the piece has its relation to the whole. And even his famous fluctuations of tempo are not done willy-nilly. They somehow help underline this cohesiveness, and it's almost like if you play a piece in exactly the same tempo, it's like the Flat Earth Society. The people who still believe that the Earth is flat, whereas with Furtwängler, somehow the Earth is round and one. So yeah, Furtwängler, Bruno Walter, Kurt Zonderling, Klemperer. These are Celle Bedake more recently. These are conductors from whom I've learned a tremendous amount in their recordings. And among pianists, Arthur Schnabel, Rudolf Serkin, Cortot, his incredible courage and imagination. And also I have to mention Edwin Fischer. There was a time in my life where, I don't know, I could say I didn't seem to be developing or progressing all that well. And then somehow I happened to be listening to Fischer's recording of the Emperor Concerto. And there was something about the spontaneity with which he played that struck a chord, namely an E flat major chord. No, it struck a chord about that when one plays a piece of music, one has to, in a sense, create it spontaneously. One has to have one has to be free. And something started to click in listening to Fischer's recordings. And when you hear a Fischer or a Schnabel, one can quibble with this or with that or this detail or that detail, but it's this overwhelming freshness and spontaneity and joie de vivre that comes across. And that's been a big, I think, wonderful thing to discover. And I try and share that with my students also.
Yes, I think that's
anyway. So there's a collection.
Yeah, I think that's a very important aspect of performing. You work hard and you assimilate everything, and the end goal is to be spontaneous and living in the moment and living on stage.
Yeah, it almost seems contradictory. One has to study every detail and practice every last detail, but the minute one goes on the stage, one has to, in a sense, wipe the slate clean and imagine that one is the composer and that one is literally recreating this piece, whatever piece it is, on the spot, as if this is a world premiere, as if the audience has never heard this music before. And I think that approach actually can be sometimes a comfort, and it can counteract stage fright. Because stage fright is often, oh, am I going to do this right? Am I going to do that right? Am I going to remember to do this? Am I going to remember to do that? But if one thinks of performing as a creative, productive thing, then it becomes more fun, less nerve-wracking.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. This has been so helpful and so inspiring to hear. I hope you stay well at this time. Is there any message that you want to say to your students or to young musicians at this time?
Oh boy. I guess I would say keep going for the core and the depth and the truth of music, and finding that is in and of itself of value, whether or not one makes any money out of it, and one can keep pursuing that high path, and that is in and of itself a worthy activity.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. And thank you so much for this opportunity to schmooze. I always like schmoozing about music, much more than I do than lecturing about music, by the way. I hate lecturing about music, but I could talk with somebody about music all night long. So thank you, and I hope to hear you play again, and best wishes, and I hope we'll talk again soon.